Hello, hello. 3 more chapters of The Tiger Rising. We'll be doing 20, 21, and 22. Chapter 20. The last thing Beauchamp said to him was, "Don't forget, now this is our business deal. It don't concern nobody else. You take that bag of meat and hide it somewhere, and I'll bring you more meat tomorrow. In the meantime, you keep your mouth shut." At 3 o'clock, the school bus pulled up, belching and gasping and sighing. Norton and Billy Threemongers started pelting Rob with date palms before the bus even came to a complete stop. The bus door opened and Sistine came running toward him, dodging the dates, looking as serious as a soldier on a battlefield. "Let's go see the tiger," she shouted to him. Rob was dismayed to see that she was still wearing his shirt and jeans. "Where's your dress?" he blurted out. "In here," she said. She held up the same grocery bag he had given her the night before. "I changed as soon as I got out of the house. My mother doesn't know. I found a book in the library today and read about big cats. Do you know that panthers live in the woods here? We could set the tiger free, and he could live with them. Come on," she said. She started to run. Rob ran too, but the keys to the cage felt heavy in his pocket, and they bumped up against his leg and slowed him down so that Sistine beat him there. When he arrived, she was standing pressed up against the fence, her fingers wrapped in the chain link. "Tigers are an endangered species, you know," she said. "It's up to us to save them." "Watch out he don't attack you," Rob said. "He won't. Tigers only attack people if they're desperately hungry." Well, this one ain't hungry? How do you know?" Sistine asked, turning around and looking at him. "Well," said Rob, "he isn't skinny, is he? He don't look starved." Sistine stared at him hard, and Rob opened his mouth and let the word fall out. "Keys," he said. Every secret magic word he had ever known. Tiger, and cancer, and Caroline. Every word in his suitcase seemed to fall right out of him when he stood before Sistine. "What?" she said. "Keys," he said again. He cleared his throat. "I got the keys to the cage." "How?" "Beauchamp," he told her. "He hired me to feed his tiger, and he gave me the keys." "All right," said Sistine. "Now all we have to do is open the locks and let him go." "No," said Rob. "Are you crazy?" she asked him. "It ain't safe. It ain't safe for him. My friend Willie Mae, she had a bird and let it go, and it just got ate up." "You're not making sense," she told him. "This is a tiger, not a bird. And I don't know who Willie Mae is. And I don't care. You can't stop me from letting this tiger go. I'll do it without the keys. I'll saw the locks off myself." "Don't," said Rob. "Don't," she mocked back. And then she spun around and grabbed hold of the cage and shook it the same way Beauchamp had earlier that day. "I hate this place," she said. "I can't wait for my dad to come and get me. When he gets here, I'm going to make him come out here and set this tiger free. That's the first thing we'll do." She shook the cage harder. "I'll get you out of here," she said to the pacing tiger. "I promise." She rattled the cage as if she were the one who was locked up. The tiger paced back and forth without stopping. "Don't," said Rob. But she didn't stop. She shook the cage and beat her head against the chain link, and then he heard her gasp. He was afraid that maybe she was choking. He went and stood next to her, and he saw that she was crying. Crying. Sistine. He stood beside her, terrified and amazed. When his mother was alive, when he still cried about things, she had been the one who comforted him. She would cup her hand around the back of his neck and say to him, "You go on and cry. I got you. I got good hold of you." Before Rob could think whether it was right or whether it was wrong, he reached out and put his palm on Sistine's neck. He could feel her pulse. beating in time with the tiger's pacing. He whispered to her the same words his mother had whispered to him. "I got you," he told her. "I got good hold of you." Sistine cried and cried. She cried as if she would never stop. And she did not tell him to take his hand away. Chapter 21. By the time they started walking back to the Kentucky Star, it was dusk. Sistine was not crying, but she wasn't talking either, not even about letting the tiger go. "I have to call my mother," she said to him in a tired voice when they got to the motel. "I'll go with you," said Rob. She didn't tell him not to, so he walked with her across the parking lot. They were almost to the laundry room when Willie Mae materialized out of the purple darkness. She was leaning up against her car, smoking a cigarette. "Boo," she said to Rob. "Hey," he told her back. "Somebody following you?" she said, jerking her head at Sistine. "This is Sistine," Rob told her. And then he turned to Sistine and said, "This is Willie Mae, the one I was telling you about, the one who had the bird and let it go." "So what?" said Sistine. "So nothing," said Willie Mae. Her glasses winked in the light from the falling Kentucky Star. "So I had me a bird." "Why are you hanging around in the parking lot trying to scare people?" Sistine asked, her voice hard and mean. "I ain't trying to scare people," said Willie Mae. "Willie Mae works here," said Rob. "That's right," said Willie Mae. She reached into the front pocket of her dress and pulled out a package of 8-ball gum. "You know what?" she said to Sistine. "I know you. You ain't got to introduce yourself to me. You angry. You got all the anger in the world inside of you. I know angry when I meet it. Been angry most of my life." "I'm not angry," Sistine snapped. "Well, all right," said Willie Mae. She opened the package of 8-ball. "You an angry liar, then. Here you go." She held out a stick of gum to Sistine. Sistine stared for a long minute at Willie Mae, and Willie Mae stared back. The last light of dusk disappeared, and the darkness moved in. Rob held his breath. He wanted desperately for the two of them to like each other. When Sistine finally reached out and took the gum from Willie Mae, he let his breath go quiet. He let his breath go in a quiet whoosh. Willie Mae nodded at Sistine, and then she extended the pack to Rob. He took a piece and put it in his pocket for later. Willie Mae lit another cigarette and laughed. "Ain't that just like God?" she said, "throwing the two of you together." She shook her head. "This boy, full of sorrow, keeping it down low in his legs, and you," she pointed her cigarette at Sistine, "you all full of anger. Got it snapping out of you like lightning. You some pair, that's the truth." She put her arms over her head and stretched, and then straightened up and stepped away from the car. Sistine stared at Willie Mae with her mouth open. "How tall are you?" she asked. 6'2", said Willie Mae. "And I gotta get on home. But first, I got some advice for you. I already gave this boy some advice. You ready for yours?" Sistine nodded, her mouth still open. "This is it. Ain't nobody going to come and rescue you," said Willie Mae. She opened the car door and sat down behind the wheel. "You gotta rescue yourself. You understand what I mean?" Sistine stared at Willie Mae. She said nothing. Willie Mae cranked the engine. Rob and Sistine watched her drive away. "I think she's a prophetess," said Sistine. "A what?" Rob asked. "A prophetess," said Sistine. "They're painted all over the Sistine ceiling. They're women who God speaks through." "Oh," said Rob, "a prophetess." He turned the word over in his mouth. "Prophetess," he said again. He nodded. That sounded right. If God was going to talk through somebody, it made sense to Rob that he would pick Willie Mae. Chapter 22. "You out in the woods with that same girl again?" his father asked as soon as Rob stepped into the room. "Yes, sir," said Rob. "Look over here, son." His father was standing by Rob's bed. "Sir?" said Rob. His heart sank. He knew what his father had found, the meat. He had hidden it under his bed until it was time to go and feed the tiger again. "Where'd this meat come from?" his father asked, pointing at the bloody brown bag. Without thinking, Rob said, "Beauchamp." "Beauchamp," his father repeated low and dark. "Beauchamp. He don't hardly pay me enough to get by, and now he's given us his rotten meat. He thinks I ain't man enough to put meat on my own table." Rob wanted to say something, but then he thought of Beauchamp and held his tongue. "I ought to teach him a lesson," his father said. The cords in his neck stood out like twigs. He kicked the bag of meat. "I ought to," he said, "making me work for less than nothing, giving us rotten meat." He went and stood in front of the gun case. He didn't unlock it. He just stood and stared and cracked his knuckles. "Daddy," said Rob, but he couldn't think of anything to say after that. His mother had known how to calm his father. She would put her hand on his arm or say his name in a soft, reproachful voice, and that would be enough. But Rob didn't know how to do those things. He stood for a minute more, and then he walked over to his bed and grabbed a piece of wood and his knife. As he left the room, his father was still standing at the locked gun case, staring through the glass at the deer hunting rifle, as if he was trying to will the gun into his hands. Rob walked to the Kentucky Star. He sat down underneath it and leaned up against one of the cold, damp poles and started to work on the wood. But his head was too full of his father's anger and Sistine's tears. He couldn't concentrate. He looked up at the dark underside of the sign and recalled lying on a blanket staring up at a big oak tree. His mother had been on one side of him and his father, asleep and snoring, had been on the other. He remembered that his mother had taken hold of his hand and pointed up at the sun shining through the leaves of the tree and said, "Look, Rob, I have never in my life seen a prettier color of green. Ain't it perfect?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, staring at the leaves. "It looks like the original green, the first one God ever thought up." His mother squeezed his hand hard. "That's right," she said. "The first one God ever thought up. The first ever green. You and me, we see the world the same." He concentrated on that green. He let it seep through a crack in his suitcase of not thoughts and fill up his head with color. He wondered if Willie Mae's cricket had been the same bright and original green. That's what he thought about as he carved. And so he wasn't surprised when he stopped and held the wood away from himself to see a wing and a beak and a tiny eye. It was Cricket, Willie Mae's cricket, coming to life under his knife. He worked on the bird for a long time, until it looked so real that he half expected it to break into song. When he finally went back to the room, he found his father asleep in the recliner. The gun case was still locked, and the bag of meat was gone. He wouldn't be able to feed the tiger in the morning. He would have to wait until Beauchamp brought him another package. Rob went and stood over his father and stared down at him. He looked at his heavy hands and the bald spot on his nodding head. He was memorizing him and trying, at the same time, to understand him, to make some sense out of him, out of his anger and his quiet, comparing it to the way he used to sing and smile when his father jerked awake. "Hey," he said. "Hey," Rob said back. "What time is it?" "I ain't sure," said Rob. "Late, I guess." His father sighed. "Go on and get me that leg medicine." Rob brought him the tube of medicine. Outside the motel room, the world creaked and sighed. The rain started in again, and his father's hands were gentle as he applied the ointment to Rob's legs. And that was our selection for today. See you next time.